All right, you're watching Lit Sports Online. This is the UFC Fight Night 158 Cowboy versus Gaethje review episode. So, got Pat on the table again, as usual. Why don't we get into it with one of the first notable fights, which was Antonio Carlos Jr., Shoeface, he's known as, going up against Uriah Hall. And this was one that ended in a Uriah Hall winning by decision. How would you break down the fight?
It kind of ended up being kind of the classic kind of striker versus grappler matchup. You know, like I said, like we said in the preview video, it's Antonio Carlos Jr. Had the advantage on the ground, and every time it went to the ground, it was more of Uriah Hall spending most of the time defending and just trying to get out of positions and things like that, and trying to stave off submission attempts. He did have some times where he was in top control and landed some ground and pound. One of those came off of a knockdown that he got in one of the later rounds. But the fight kind of really, he set the precedent for how the fight was going to go pretty early in the first round when he landed a giant right hand that shattered Shoeface's nose. And so it just immediately started pouring blood. This is the first 2 minutes of the fight. And so his cardio was kind of affected for the rest of the fight. And, you know, when somebody breaks your nose that quickly, you're not going to be in the same state of mind for the next, 13-odd minutes that you have to fight, right? And, like I said, it just kind of set the precedent. Carlos Jr. had some good submission attempts in there. He landed a couple shots of his own and, got some takedowns, was able to control it and be aggressive. But Hall, every time it was on the feet, Uriah Hall landed the bigger shots and was able to have pretty decent defense on the ground. And Carlos Jr. wasn't really able to pull anything off big enough to let him win much of the fight. It was a good win for Uriah Hall. He's one of those guys who he has flashes of brilliance, but he just never quite put like a very combination heavy striking game together like I would like to see him, because he has great power in his hands and he has really good timing, but he doesn't really string together a lot of punches, and I think if he did that, he'd be a little more effective. But he's calling out some of the guys at the top of the division. He'll move up from here. I think they're both ranked in the top 15, so Uriah Hall's starting his climb back up to the top. He wants to go for that belt, and we'll see what happens. He's an exciting guy, but there's some tough matchups at the top of the division for him.
We also had an odd fight happen with Michel Perreira going up against Tristan Connelly, and Michel was using a lot of acrobatics in the fight. I feel like it's not the first time I've seen something like this in MMA. Sometimes it seems like guys get cocky, they start pulling out the dance moves and shit like that, and this is kind of one of those situations. But how would you break down this one?
It like you said, the dance moves and stuff, it's always funny because sometimes a guy pulls them out like Cody Garbrandt versus Dominic Cruz, where he knocks Dominic down and then does the robot real quick or something like that, and then you're like, damn, that's kind of awesome because he's winning the fight. But when you do shit like this, where you're doing backflips and you're jumping off the cage and you're doing cartwheels and stuff, and then you gas yourself out and lose the fight because you're too tired, to a much smaller guy. So the background to this fight actually is Michel Perreira's original opponent dropped out on short notice. They called in this guy Tristan Connelly, who's a jiu-jitsu black belt from Canada, a couple days notice, I think 5 days notice or something like that. Connelly's normally a lightweight, so he fights at 155 typically. He went up a weight class because he didn't have time to cut weight and all that to fight Pereira. Pereira missed weight by a pound. So they're fighting a welterweight at 170. Pettit weighed in at 171, so he misses weight for the fight. Or 172, I think, because they give you the 1 pound allowance. But reportedly cut 38.5 pounds for the fight. Then also, before the fight started, he had a 6-minute walkout where he did a coordinated dance and was doing flips and shit. And so he's doing all this crazy stuff before the fight. And then in the ring, he looks way bigger than the other guy. Way stronger than the other guy. Does a bunch more flips and shit, and then gets tired, and the other guy just kept pressuring him and kept pushing forward and got takedowns and had some effective striking, and the other guy just was able to be aggressive and control the pace of the fight and tire Pereira out. So it's kind of like you watch this dude do all this crazy shit, and then he's just too tired to actually fight well. Like, I mean, he paid the price, right? He didn't.
So it's like the classic case of like trying to be a showman and it backfires.
Yeah, but it's more than that. You know, he didn't manage his weight correctly, so his weight cut was crazy. So even if he normally would fight doing all this crazy stuff, he didn't manage his weight cut correctly and had to cut an ungodly amount of weight to make this fight. So, like, he paid the price for that in his cardio, and then he does all this crazy nonsense that isn't really effective. It would be one thing if he was landing big shots while he's doing this stuff, but he didn't really do anything with those shots. They were just kind of whiffs. And so it's just kind of like, he's an entertaining guy to watch, but yeah, you're exactly right. He went for the entertaining factor over being effective, and he paid the price for it. He lost a very short notice fight to a dude who wasn't, you know, in probably his typical fight shape. Very short notice, his first shot in the UFC. That's a big fight to lose if you're a guy who's relatively high profile because of your antics, you know?
But it was a nice win for Tristan Connelly.
I think it was the performance of the night, personally. He looked amazing.
And then moving on to the next fight, we had Todd Duffee returning for his first fight after 4 years of being away from the sport, and then going up against Jeff Hughes. And so this fight was interesting to me in like how much of the fighting was like up against the cage. Yeah. It seemed like there was a lot of just like grappling up against the cage, and that's actually kind of how the fight ended, because it ended in a no contest due to an eye poke from Jeff Hughes, which, you know, didn't look like it was really intentional, but it happened, and you know, Todd Duffee didn't want to continue. He had double vision going on. The doctor checked him out, and they just decided no contest.
Yeah, and but both, like you said, it was a lot of like clinch work and dirty boxing, right? There's a lot of guys, both dudes throwing shots in close, and both guys landed huge shots on each other. Like, it was kind of a nuts fight up to that point, because it was just two heavyweights both just throwing everything with every shot, trying to knock the other guy out. And both guys landed giant shots on the chin of the other dude and almost had him out, you know, could have had them out of there, you know, with one more lucky shot. And there was like, especially one point for Todd Duffee where I thought he could have finished the fight, but he stayed a little too close and tried to land some uppercuts and missed and allowed Hughes to recover. And then in like the next transition, yeah, as they're Jeff Hughes got Todd Duffee's back off the fence and was trying to get out of the clinch to separate a little bit. And while he was pushing off, his hand slid up his face and pointer finger right in the eye. And yeah, Duffee told the doctor he couldn't see correctly and ended the fight, you know. And a lot of people in the media are saying, that I've heard, is he looked extremely tired before that, and it was just a way out of the fight without losing. I don't know if that's necessarily true, and, you know, it's not our place to say whether he was or was not able to continue, but he looked extremely tired, and it was just an unfortunate moment.
Now, do they change the result if it's like a more blatant eye poke? Like, do they just straight up disqualify the guy that did it and it's a win for the other guy? Or like, So there's a little bit of like judgment from the referees in this.
Yeah, if it's a blatantly illegal move that causes the end of the fight, for sure it's a DQ. So it's a disqualification, and the guy who was on the receiving end wins the fight. Like that happened with John Jones' only loss, right? He threw some 12-6 elbows and they DQ'd him. It was the most high-profile one I can think of. So yeah, if it's obviously on purpose, it's a win for the guy who was or a loss for the guy who was in the wrong.
So yeah, I mean that's the way this one ended, and pretty crazy fight, honestly.
Yeah, unfortunate way for him to come back after so long out of the game. It's unfortunate.
And then we had Glover Teixeira versus Nikita Krylov. This one might have actually been what I thought was one of the more entertaining fights, and one of the very close, and you weren't sure how it was going to end. But you know, it did. There's a lot of grappling, a lot of takedowns in this one. It seemed to me that Glover Teixeira was looking like the more dominant fighter for a lot of the match, even though it was scored a close fight. But when it ultimately came down to a split decision, and Teixeira won by split decision, right decision?
I think so. He had this one combination that landed repeatedly throughout the fight, and I think Daniel Cormier pointed out, and that's when I started to notice it, is it just repeatedly landed an overhand right followed by a left hook. It was like off of a jab from Krylov. When Krylov steps in for the jab and extends his front arm, Glover Teixeira went over the top with his right hand and then followed up with a left hook as, Krylov's trying to recenter himself because he's leaning into that jab. So as he tries to get himself back to, kind of equal weight, Teixeira throws that left hook, right, to try to catch him. And that landed repeatedly, and that was how Teixeira was initiating a lot of clinches and getting takedowns and controlling the fight. And Teixeira has a really good, ground and pound game, a really good top game, but Krylov was able to get some reversals. He was able to have some time in top control winning the fight, especially in the third round. A lot of the third round was Krylov on top, and right at the end of the third round, Teixeira was able to turn it around. But I thought that, both guys looked good. It was a really, like you said, it was a really close fight. It was a really fun fight to watch. But, and I don't think either guy, their, standing is really hurt all that much. It's unfortunate for Krylov because he's a younger guy. He's kind of working his way up through the ranks. And to lose to Teixeira, a guy who's older, he's not going to get a title shot again, most likely. And if it does, nobody wants to see him fight Gustafsson or Jones or whoever has the title because they've all handled him pretty easily. But like I said, both guys looked pretty good. So I'm interested to see what they do with Glover from here. He's an older guy, so he's kind of holding up the top of the division in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that impressed me with Krylov's performance is that he did show a good job of getting out of submissions. Mm-hmm. Kind of like his transitions in those ground situations. But what I thought was lacking in his game in this fight was that he seemed like at times he was kind of like running away from Teixeira. Like he wasn't aggressive at all, in my opinion, and particularly in the stand-up game.
Yeah, and that could be a big part of what wins somebody a fight. That's part of how they judge the fight is aggressiveness and octagon control. So since Teixeira was the one moving forward the whole fight and had Krylov constantly backing up and getting out of the way to try to reset, that's controlling the action, controlling the space of the octagon, and being aggressive. So that's, even if they both landed equal strikes and equal takedowns and all that stuff, just that forward motion of Teixeira is enough to put him over the edge to win the fight. And that was definitely a big part of it in my eyes. Outside of the fact that I thought he was slightly more effective in every position. I thought he landed a little more strikes, a little more top control, a little more effective ground and pound, and definitely more submission attempts. So I think it was the right decision, but it was a fun fight nonetheless. And I think both guys, it's going to be exciting to see what happens from here.
And then going into the main event, the final fight of the night, it was Donald Cowboy Cerrone against Justin Gaethje, and this is one where Gaethje ended up winning the fight in round 1 by a technical knockout, although it was kind of odd the way it went down because when he dropped Cerrone, he was doing that whole thing where it's like, all right, I'm going to keep punching you while you fell down until the ref stops the fight, right? Mm-hmm. And the ref wasn't stopping the fight, and he just kind of held back, and he's like, "You gonna stop the fight? You gonna stop the fight?" It was weird, dude.
Yeah, it was an odd ending, and I think that those guys are friends. They've trained together in the past, right? So they have a rapport, and Gaethje, most fighters with other fighters in general don't want to land more shots than they need to, but especially when you're friends with somebody, right? And Gaethje landed a big shot, dropped Cerrone. Cerrone seemed fine when he hit the ground. He started to put a little bit of defense, move his head, try to go for a takedown. Then Gaethje landed another punch. Cerrone's arms kind of went limp, and then he kind of straightened himself back up again, and the ref didn't jump in. So, like you said, Gaethje kept landing a couple of shots, but he was looking at the ref like, what are you doing? And after the fight was over, Gaethje was obviously upset. And then Cerrone, argued that they stopped the fight too early, but that's just, dude's tough as hell, so he's never going to want to be out of a fight. But I did think that the stoppage was a little late. I think that after those first 2 strikes when Cerrone was on his hands and knees, I thought the fight could have been over. But it was a good fight. Definitely kind of a number 1 contenders fight. I wouldn't be surprised if they put Gaethje into a title shot after this. Cerrone's coming off 2 losses before, or this is the 2nd loss in a row. His last loss being to Tony Ferguson, so it's a skid for him. But his name value is so big, and he's so good that he's never more than a couple fights away from the top of the division. But So that's why I think that, justifying a title shot for Gaethje with this win isn't that crazy, especially if they do the Tony Ferguson fight before that. If, Tony Ferguson versus Khabib, if Justin gets the winner of that fight, that would be a good matchup. I think I would like to see him fight both guys. But Gaethje looked phenomenal in this fight. He looked a little more measured than he normally does. He still had his big punches and heavy leg kicks, but he had a little more lateral motion than he normally does. He was cutting corners a little bit. He wasn't being as kind of recklessly aggressive, which is something you can't do with Cerrone, because Cerrone is a fantastic counter striker. And so if you're walking towards Cerrone and throwing big reckless hooks like that, he's going to land a crazy quick combination on you, like he did with Rick Story and Matt Brown and countless other guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we talked about what might happen in the preview for this, it ended up going a different way, because it seemed like both fighters were more measured and cautious in their approach, not just like going heads down into it. And it was just interesting to me, because I haven't really seen a whole lot of Gaethje fighting that way. I'm used to seeing him more of just like pressing the pace the entire fight.
Yeah, and I think that's a respect that he showed to Cerrone, because Cerrone is so good at that counter-striking game, and it's weird with Cerrone in that sense, because I say the same thing for when he looks good and when he looks bad, are pressure, right? And it's guys who apply pressure and throw a ton of volume of strikes and then mix it up and go for a takedown kind of bewilder Cerrone to a sense, and he starts backing up. But guys who typically just come forward and don't go for the takedown but have high pressure just striking, Cerrone does really great against, and his counter striking is on point, his timing's great, he's very quick, he has crafty combinations and kicks. But you're right, man, it didn't go that way. Both guys were moving forward. Cerrone never got pressured into backing up a lot, and I think that was kind of one of the things that led to the finish, was the fact that Gaethje was able to get Cerrone to fight in that close proximity that he wants. Gaethje has a much shorter reach than Cerrone, and his game is not predicated on being on the outside like Cerrone's is, where Cerrone will throw long punches and big roundhouse kicks and push kicks and stuff like that. Gaethje was able to get Cerrone to engage him close up because they were both trying to move forward, and that's how he got the finish. Cerrone was, had ducked his head, and Gaethje took a step back, and as he took a step back, Cerrone saw the space, threw a hook, left his chin out, and Gaethje landed a right over his left arm and got the finish. It was a great finish for Gaethje, but it was an entertaining fight. It went a little differently than I thought, but it's a little clarity towards the top of the division for the time being,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's all the fights for the review for this episode, and thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, check out our website that's in the description. Stay tuned to LitTube. So you're saying you have nothing to offer to this conversation?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you.
That'll show that YouTube commenter. Fucking haters. Sitting at home drinking their haterade.
Justin, talk
I
a
didn't.
little bit
That's
more.
not an original joke.
I mean, the silent majority of our viewers actually appreciate the content. Just the assholes that drop a comment.
The silent majority. The assholes that drop a comment?